Hello, this is from Caracas. I'm Ray Gomez. President Nicolas Maduro has repeatedly denounced that there is an unconventional war in progress in Venezuela. What role do social networks play in this war, taking into consideration that their central servers are based in countries such as the United States? I will talk with Andrea Hermoso, Vice Minister of New Ways of Communication in this country, in Venezuela. Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Well, the social networks have changed all the communicational schemes developed by conventional media. Does this mean that the communicative behavior of the audience has also changed?
Bueno, estamos ante un fenómeno.
Well, this is a phenomenon in which a new form of communication is inserted within the framework of mass communication. And of course, that in another way will have a new form of impact on the audience consuming that information, taking into account that the first ones that have changed to adapt to this new form of communication is the mass media, especially these digital forms, these new forms of penetration in the younger audience that consume social networks, web pages, and applications for smartphones. They are consuming more and more computer equipment, and this technology entails for the entertainment and professional development. Then, of course, we will have a type of incident, in this case, as we are seeing with the phenomenon of social networks, we have that this incidence occurs primarily in the younger sectors of the global population, not only in Latin America and Venezuela, but all over the world.
Well, in the case of Venezuela, how does this phenomenon behave? How have the social networks been positioned here?
Sí, en Venezuela hace más de 10 años que...
Yes, in Venezuela more than 10 years ago, they came through the internet. Social networks have begun to penetrate, specifically in the youth sector, but they are also being consumed by all sectors of the population, especially in sectors of large cities that have access to the internet and technology more closely. And obviously, our population has been consuming these networks mainly as entertainment, but it has also penetrated other areas of communication, such as social communication. I'm talking about communication of groups, organizations, and political communication. Even this tool has been used for educational and professional purposes. There are new ways in which we manage this, independently of the sector in which we develop or in which we work and the generation in which we find ourselves, and this has obviously become part of a new form and a new culture of communication for all Venezuelans and Latin Americans.
Aside from a new way of communication, do you think this is a new way of globalization?
It is a form that the same system has brought the internet when it is created, and when it comes to providing different services, not only of communication, but also for technological services, services for clients, for companies, for social organizations, for human beings, because it has come to give the form and the way that we are connected. Because this new technology, that is the internet, allows through the network that is formed by nodes that there can be a type of intercommunication between any part of the world as long as it is connected through that internet networks. Of course, it is a new form and it is a new space, a new culture of communication that, of course, this has contributed a lot to globalization and to the theme of the global village, the way of control even through global communication.
Well, how has this influenced the behavior of the Venezuelan society? I mean, their social and cultural life, their point of view in a digital world.
Bueno, ha cambiado
Well, it
bastante, sobre
has
todo, como
changed
te,
a
como
lot,
te decía,
especially
en
as I
esos
said before,
espacios
in those young
jóvenes y en
spaces
los
and
espacios
in the
políticos, porque en
political
Venezuela se da un
spaces,
fenómeno
because in
muy
Venezuela there
especial,
has
que
been
luego
a
también
very
hemos visto en
special
otros lugares,
phenomenon
pero que
that we have
cuando
also seen in other
cuando empezó
places,
el
but
auge
when the
de
social
las redes
networks
sociales,
boomed
en
in
Venezuela,
Venezuela,
se
it began
utilizaron
to
mucho,
be
se empezaron a
used for
utilizar
the political
para
organization
la
and for
organización
the
política, para
defense
la
of the
defensa
truth,
de la verdad, sobre todo los
especially
sectores
the sectors
afectos
who
a la
support
revolución bolivariana se
the
dieron cuenta de que era
Bolivarian
una herramienta
Revolution.
utilizable
They realized
para
that it was a
decir la verdad
useful
de
tool
Venezuela
to
al
tell
mundo,
the
porque es
truth
una
of
nueva
Venezuela
ventana al
to the
mundo,
world,
que no se
because
queda
it is a new
solamente
window
como
into
puede
the
ser la
world
radio, la
that is not
televisión,
only
en
the
una red
radio or
territorialmente
television
local
in a
o
local
regional, sino que
territory or
puede ir
regional
más
network,
allá
but
con
that it
una
also can go
inversión
further with an
incluso
investment
muy baja
even very
y
low and
además muy
also very
personal, donde
personal,
tú
where you can
individualmente puedes
individually
tomar
take the tool and
la
raise your
herramienta y
voice.
elevar tu voz. Entonces
The
creo el pueblo
Venezuelan
venezolano
people
se dio
realized
cuenta
that
de que
these
esos
were
eran espacios
spaces
en
in
los
which
que se
the
podía
truth of
defender
Venezuela and the
tanto
Bolivarian
localmente como
Revolution could be
internacionalmente la verdad de
defended
Venezuela, la verdad de la
internationally,
revolución
who
bolivariana
has
que
been
siempre ha estado
transmitted
desde el
from
punto de
a
vista internacional
international point of view
siendo
in a way
transmitida
that
de
is not
maneras no
necessarily
necesariamente
correct or
correctas
not
o no
necessarily with the
necesariamente con la
truth
verdad
from the
desde el
point
punto
of
de vista
view
de las
of these
grandes
big
empresas de
communication
comunicación.
companies.
Entonces el
So
pueblo
the
venezolano dijo,
Venezuelan people said,
estos
these
espacios
spacers
son
are efficient
lo
enough for
suficientemente
us so we
eficientes
can take
como para que
them
nosotros
as
podamos
tools
tomarlos
to
como
tell
herramientas
our
para decir
truth
nuestra
to the
verdad al
world.
mundo.
When did the Venezuelan people realize that?
Sí.
When did the Venezuelan people take that into consideration? In what historical moments?
I believe that the point of inflection was given to us by our commander Chavez. He realized on time that the value of these networks, and he called us all, starting with him, to be part of those tools and to take over them and empower our organizations. He made that call, and most of the people said, yes, Chavez is right, and there is a space where in the end you can do political work in favor and above everything in favor of the truth. In many places or in most of the countries, they were seen as innocent spaces used as simple tools of entertainment and social networking. But after this was realized, even countries in Europe were concerned about the power that this can have in a corporation that can develop the power in social networks around the world to convey messages that are not necessarily innocent or are for entertainment but can even harm the population with hate messages, terrorism messages, etc. And the world, the people of the world are now realizing that, and thanks to Chavez, Venezuelan people are aware and have already taken a few steps forward. In this case, we are talking about social networks and all those spaces of digital communication that can develop on the internet and web pages.
Social networks do Venezuelans use the most, and why?
Venezuela has always been at the forefront of the social media positioning. Every year, or quite regularly, in the last 10 years, we have seen emerging new services for new applications of social networks, and Venezuelans have always been in the vanguard of assuming these spaces. The first, of course, that existed, and the one that assumed a task even to understand that tool, was Twitter. But gradually, there are also other corporations that have developed services such as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp Messenger, etc., etc. Every year, new spaces are emerging, and the Venezuelan population has always been at the forefront of assuming it for their daily communication.
I mean, how have these social networks influenced, for better or worse, the way the Venezuelans assume a political position?
Sí. Creo que
I think
se ha
that it
entendido
has
que son
been
espacios
understood
que
that they
pueden
are
ser
spaces
para
for
el relacionamiento
emotional
emotivo,
relations
el
and
relacionamiento
social
social, para el
relations,
entretenimiento,
for
pero también para
entertainment,
decir
but
nuestras
also
verdades,
to tell
también para
our truth
dar esa
and to
batalla,
give that
porque al
battle,
final las
because
redes
at the
sociales han
end, those
sido
social
también
networks
potenciadas por
have
los medios
also been
tradicionales,
empowered by traditional media,
asumiendo que de
assuming
allí
that
salen
that's where
verdades.
the truth
Ahora,
comes from.
como desde
Now,
allí salen
since the
verdades,
truth comes
muchos
out of there,
este,
many interests have
intereses
realized
se
that
han
they
dado
can
cuenta que
screw
pueden
that truth and
malear
then
esa
take
verdad y
advantage
entonces
through
aprovechan
laboratories,
para, a
through
través de
creation
laboratorios,
of
a través de
false
creación de
accounts
cuentas
or
falsas o de mensajes
anonymous
anónimos,
messages,
de tratar
trying
de
to
torcer esa
twist
verdad
that truth in
redes
social
sociales, que además es
networks,
medible de
which is
alguna u otra
also
forma,
measurable
pero
in
que
one way or
todavía
another, but
tiene
still faces some
algunos
problems to
problemas
measure
para
the truth
medir la
because
verdad,
of the
que es que,
presence
bueno,
of
existe el
anonymity.
anonimato,
There is the
existen
capacity
la
to
capacidad
transmit
de
hate
transmitir
messages,
mensajes de
sometimes
odio, a
veiled,
veces veladamente,
sometimes
a
with the
veces
same
con la misma
consent of the
anuencia de la
corporation
corporación que
that
maneja esa red
manages that
social.
social
Entonces, bueno,
network. So basically, there
hay
is a
mucho de
lot
verdad en
of
las redes
truth in
sociales,
social
en las
networks,
personas, sobre
especially in
todo cuando
people
hay
who
una
show their
persona
face
que da
in the
la cara por el
message, but
mensaje,
there
pero
can
también puede
also
haber
be
mucho de
a lot
falsedad,
of
mucho de
falsehood,
mentira y mucho
lies,
de
and
manipulación
manipulation
por parte
by
de quienes
those who
tienen
have
intereses
interests in the
en la
massive
mediática
national and
masiva,
transnational
transnacional y
media.
nacional.
So, do you agree with media analysts and researchers who claim that psychological warfare laboratories are responsible for publishing digital messages to manipulate the audience? How is this possible, technically speaking?
Bueno,
Well, social networks or spaces offered by a social networking service allows you to open a personal account so that through that personal account you spread your messages and connect. You can even connect with other people, but in those social networks the levels of security or verification are not as efficient or are still on that path to perfection, where each person has a single account. Well, that is not totally controllable. These corporations, these social networking systems allow a single person to open many accounts. So these laboratories are usually generated from media spaces. The intention of them is to position a specific message, has the ability to open many accounts anonymously and try to modify in some way the statistics on a specific issue to look like something is happening in Venezuela while it's not really happening.
Is this the origin, for instance, of the so-called hate messages you've been speaking to bring the society to verbal, even physical clashes? In the case of Venezuelans, for instance?
Venezuelans have been victims of this in recent years since the creation of these communication systems, but additionally, this year we lived a few months where violence not only existed in the street, specifically physically, but there was violence that was replicated or fed from these social networks, and as it happened, through these laboratories, they used many anonymous accounts and many unverified accounts where you did not know who was communicating there to make it look like it was a mass talking to someone.
From April to July, during the so-called guarimbas.
Since April, we lived very strong manifestation months, like Venezuelan people were subjected to many acts of street violence. Even in some cases, people had to stay in their homes and they were not even allowed to go to work because the idea of all this political movement was to paralyze the country, paralyze the productive force of the country, and in addition to make it appear that we live in a government that does not protect its people. All this was part of an international media operation where the idea was to project in Venezuela a situation of chaos, political unrest that was encouraged from the street and from media spaces, including social networks.
And what characterizes the language of messages in the social networks?
Well, depending of the intention of who creates the message and who wants to speak the truth.
Who is after this? I mean, political leaders in Venezuela, political leaders out of Venezuela, both of them, not only political leaders.
No solamente líderes políticos, está la
Not
gente,
only political leaders, there are the people who normally use their social network as a form of natural expression, real with their truth, with sincerity, trying the best to say what they think and of the speaking their opinion. But behind the big laboratories that I tell you generates amounts of hate messages or to generate anguish, to make believe that something is happening, but it really is not happening. If there is leadership, I could not tell you exactly if they are politicians, but there are political interests behind those big laboratories, which obviously come together with interest media, with economic interests. Not only they have headquarters anchored in Venezuela, but they have an international and transnational anchor. Then if in some way they trace these psychological operations to distress, to generate demoralization of the people there, it is an interest, and there are large laboratories with interests in which they generate negative emotions in the Venezuelan population.
Let's talk, for instance, on the so-called fake news. How are they created here in Venezuela? What are the main topics they use to generate fake news?
The false news, as we know, are not new and have not come with social networks. There are many fake news that have been famous, and we know, and that are made with the intention to generate a reaction, perhaps from the population, perhaps from elements of the global world. But social networks have arrived with that innocence of entertainment spaces where people join to communicate with their friends and transmit positive emotions, but they are taking advantage of these spaces to tell people things that are not true, things that are false, and since those spaces have been accepted as episodes of truth, then people assume it more quickly. Something that does not happen at this time with traditional media, such as radio, television, or the written press, where we as Venezuelans have had with Chavezs and our President Maduro great masters, where they explain that there are interests behind the media and that not everything that is written in the media is true, and then the fake news have seen the potential, these spaces of social networks, and have exploded it.
What? On food, on means of transportation?
En todos los aspectos,
In all aspects, you can make a fake news, but the interests that we have obviously seen that are behind this fake news are always political, they are always economical, and always respond to large corporations or big interests that are not shown in these social networks to magnify that message.
The media corporations, responding to the interests of the political right wing, claim that they publish no matter what on the social media, on the social networks, in the name of freedom of expression and information. How true is this? I mean, is freedom of information so unlimited that it may fall into disinformation?
esta discusión nosotros la tuvimos en el
We
año
had this discussion in 2005 when the topic of social responsibility in radio and television began to be brought to the fore. The law of social responsibility in radio and television, we call it the resort law in its abbreviation. This law began to speak in Venezuela about the responsibility that each person has when expressing a message, especially through mass media, against someone, against an idea. Even that it can, though it can hurt another person, be offensive, or even be a lie or a fallacy. All of us began to talk about that, and this law established in Venezuela that says that everyone who generates a message that has a consequence for another person or for another group of people has a responsibility. Even before the law, those who can say that They wanted, without having any responsibility in the name of freedom, forget that morally and humanly everything that we express will have a consequence in the other or in others. Because communication is not only a right to express what you want, but also that there are rights of others before the audiences, of those who receive the information, of having first the truth, and second to have the right to reply or to claim if they feel that a message affects their person or their community. So those who say this often hide in anonymity or in the called freedom of expression that is not there until it implies absolute responsibility over these messages. What happens with these social network corporations is that, as you said, they are governed by American laws or by laws that are not Venezuelan, and many individuals take advantage of it to not comply with the human laws, morals, and also the Venezuelan laws, and pass over them with the hatred or offenses.
Now, how to react to these digital messages everyone receives here in Venezuela and no matter what country?
Nosotros hemos, a través de nuestra Asamblea Nacional
We Venezuelans, through our Constituent National Assembly, have given ourselves the start, the work of a law against hate that is basically a law against hate messages in different spaces of different forms, not only in social networks but in traditional media, in spaces of coexistence, in the streets, etc. And it is a law that is going to be developed. It is already approved, but it requires all the regulations, all the operational development of that law. And basically the law is a great tool for the diffusion of peace, for the dissemination of tolerance. We believe that to replace those messages of hatred or that intention to spread the hatred by spreading a sense of anguish or anxiety in the population, because what has to be imposed or what has to be opposed to that is peace and a law against hate. Beyond being a law against hate, because in its statement it is a law against hate, but if you read the article you will realize that it is a law for peace that promotes messages of peace. Yes, in favor of tolerance and peaceful coexistence. In other words, they generate a series of mechanisms in that law to promote the messages of peace, spaces of peace, spaces where there is an exchange of ideas with tolerance. And then I believe that it is a very important step that we took as Venezuelans. In the face of this attack and that violence, we lived with the National Constituent Assembly that brought peace to Venezuela, and it's immediately brought a significant drop in those hate messages. But you also need many more spaces of peace and tolerance between groups to see the other face that is different from me and understand it and accept it.
De ver al otro que es diferente a mí y entenderlo y aceptarlo.
What would you say to a person here in Venezuela who receives that kind of messages and reacts in a violent way? What is your message to that person?
Violence can only be countered with tolerance and peace by all of us who at some point receive hate messages that also often do not even fall into the category of an ideological one, but simply these offenses or attempts to diminish your emotion of moral capacity. The only way to respond to that is with love and peace. And that is what we are currently preaching from the same President Nicolás Maduro, who has been the victim of the great attacks, of even great psychological operations to try to transmit things that are not true about him, about his work, about his government, even to the Venezuelans who every day have to go to work. And at some point, they did not allow us to live our lives because there would be violence in our neighborhoods. All of us who believe in a country of peace, in a country of love and tolerance between us, we have to have that flag. The flag of the one who hates can only be answered with love and with peace and with tolerance and also with understanding.
And finally, what can we expect from social networks in 2018, a year when there will be a presidential election in Venezuela?
Creo que hay muchos retos para los venezolanos en el ámbito de
I
la
think there are
comunicación
many
digital.
challenges
Hay
for
muchos retos para el
Venezuelans in the
gobierno
field of
venezolano.
digital
Hay muchos
communication.
retos para la
There are many
oposición
challenges for the Venezuelan
Pero sobre
government.
todo
There
hay
are many
muchos retos
challenges
para
for the Venezuelan
el
opposition.
venezolano
But
que
above all, there
consume
are
y
many
que es
challenges
usuario
for the
de la
Venezuelan
comunicación
consumer
digital.
and
Creo
that
que nosotros,
digital communication user.
tenemos el mismo
I
reto
believe that we
que hemos
have the
tenido
same
todos estos
challenge
años, y
that
es el
we
de la
have had
organización.
all these
Nosotros nos
years, and
empoderamos
that
en la
is the
organización.
organization.
Nosotros nos empoderamos en la
We
manera en que
empower the
colectivamente,
organization in the way in which we
unimos
collectively
nuestras
join
fuerzas,
our
no
strength,
necesariamente en
not
grandes
necessarily
espacios,
in
sino
large
en
spaces,
comunidad,
but in community,
en
in
grupos sociales,
social
en
groups,
sectores,
in student
incluso el
sectors,
estudiantil, el
youth,
juvenil,
women, in social
las
sectors,
mujeres, en
in which we
sectores
can
sociales,
together
en sectores, en el
exercise
que nosotros
our right and
unificadamente
even
podamos
make
hacer valer
our
nuestros
demands
derechos
as
y
organized
incluso
communities.
hacer
I
nuestras
think that
demandas
this is a
como
permanent
comunidades
challenge, and
organizadas.
in the
Creo que ese es
digital
un reto
communication
que es
community, there
permanente
is
y la
also
comunicación
so
digital
much to demand
también
services
existe,
as
tanto
to
para
give
exigir
a
mejores
more
servicios
accurate
como
message
para
and to
dar
raise our
mensajes
truth
más
from the
acertados, como
most
para
local spaces
elevar
to the
nuestra
whole
verdad
world, and
desde lo
above all
local,
to unite.
desde lo regional y
To
desde lo
feel
nacional
that
al mundo
as
entero,
united
y sobre
Venezuelans,
todo
we can
unirnos,
achieve
sentir
those
que,
goals that
como
we
venezolanos cada
propose.
vez
I
solamente
believe
unidos
that
podemos
2018
lograr
is going
esas
to be
metas
a
que nos
year for us to
proponemos.
assume
Creo que
that
2018 va a
challenge
ser
of
un año
unifying
para que
ourselves
nosotros
in the small and the
asumamos ese
big
reto
and
de
to get
unirnos
out of the
en lo
difficulties
pequeño y en lo
that we
grande
have had and to
para
achieve and
lograr,
stay on the
salir de
path
las
of
dificultades
progress
que tenemos
of
y
our
lograr
revolution.
alcanzar y mantenernos en el camino del progreso de nuestra revolución.
Andrea, thank you very much for your comments on Telesur English.
Muchas gracias, Rey.
Andrea Hermoso, Vice Minister of New Ways of Communication in Venezuela. I'm Ray Gomez. This is from Caracas. Thank you for joining us.